Hello, and welcome to all of you on this episode of the Sommelier Series hosted by Nagarro. I'm very happy to have a chance to talk to Dr. Venkat Padmanabhan here. He's a managing director at Microsoft Research, and I would consider this position a very influential one. He's been part of the research community for a long standing. He is also a recipient of Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, which is a prestigious award. And along with, he's also a member of the ACM, IEEE, and several organizations. I had the privilege of knowing Dr. Venkat since his college days at IIT Delhi. And he went on to do his MS and PhD from Berkeley, California. I would really like him to talk a little bit about his research interests and topics that he has been, working on for the last few years. Before we go on to, the topic for the day, which is, how is AI impacting or creating social impact in our world, which I think is an amazing topic generally for so many reasons that I would like to, explore with him. So over to you, Dr. Venkat. I mean, perhaps you can share a little bit about yourself, your research interests, and other interests that you think would be relevant for our audience to know.
Yeah, thanks, Anurag. Really happy to be on this session today. I think, Anurag, you already summarized my career trajectory. What I would say is, the thing that drives me is work that has an impact on users, right? So throughout my career, I've been looking at work, not just in the AI context, which is a recent phenomenon, but sort of even in the past, on looking at ways of leveraging technology to make a difference for users in a somewhat a direct and tangible manner. And I've done that in the context of mobile systems, sensing, networking, and other areas that I've worked in the past. So I'm really happy today to have the opportunity to tell you about some of the work that my colleagues and I have done, and other work that's in the space of AI and technology for social good, and having a discussion with you, Anurag.
Thank you. I'll keep calling you Venkat. It's easier, also because I know you. Yeah. So wonderful. Let me quickly introduce myself as well. It's only fair. I'm Anurag Sahay, and I am the global practice lead of AI and data science at Nagarro. At Nagarro, we've invested a lot in these topics, and we are continuously trying to build our mind share and thought leadership around this topic. We see a lot of value coming from a topic like this for our clients and customers, and also to the larger society we are living at. And we want to explore that in a lot more honest way, which is why we have a topic like this at the Sommelier, in the Sommelier series. Before I start on this topic, which I think is a topic that I think at some level has been talked in a few different ways in the past. It's not a completely new topic. I mean, AI for social good has been talked about in many, many different ways. But before we address the topic, I want to talk a little bit about the problem of meaning. The problem of meaning, the way I look at it, Venkat, is this problem that, we are all looking for meaningfulness in our lives as people. It's just the natural thing to look for. At least I look for, and I'm sure that, what I know of you all and others around us, right? It's not just always about money, status, or success. Yeah. Sometimes we are looking for, are we doing something around, in the world that we live at, right? And technology has been such a thing, it's been such a transformative element in our lifetimes. I mean, if you look at what has happened in the last 150 years, pretty much all the magic in our lives in the world that we look at, technology has been one of the most significant elements in this, right? So it's natural for us to think about, like, how could technology become an even better driver of social good in our lives, right? But this problem of meaning, the problem of, like, can we make our work more meaningful? Would you want to share some things around this feeling and sentiment that we have usually before we go into the topic of technology and so on?
Right. Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think the way I look at it is that I would not separate out doing good and doing what makes sense, for example, from a business viewpoint. I think the two are actually, in my view, sort of tied together, right? So essentially, the way I look at it, we want to do work that touches people perhaps on the other side of the world who have never seen you or you have never met in a positive way, right? So in some cases you do it with a commercial product. In other cases you do it as part of a social good application. But the reality is that you're looking for hard problems that technology and AI as part of that technology suite can help solve. And so I'll give you sort of maybe a concrete example of some of the work that is or something that has driven some of my work. So road safety is an issue that's been very close to my heart, right? Because it is it's a pretty major problem around the world. In particular in India, it's huge. In fact, it is if you look at sort of the causes of fatalities and causes of death, it's in the top 10. So it's really a public health issue, right? And when I worked with Microsoft Research in the US for about 9 years, and then I moved to the lab in Bangalore around 2007, about 15 years ago. And one of the first things that hits you almost literally is the traffic, right? And how chaotic it is. And of course, having been in India for the first 20 years of my life, I'm quite familiar with this. I was quite familiar with how things were. But when you come back after a gap, it really hits you. And so my colleagues and I said, hey, the smartphones, this is around 2007. So smartphones were just emerging. We were wondering, can we use smartphones to do something about this, right? It turned out that phones those days didn't really have much by way of sensors and so on. So we kind of had to put together a contraption with a phone with some external sensors and so on. And we built a system, we called it Nericell, for monitoring how a driver was driving, right? Things like sharp braking and speeding and things like that. So at that point, it was interesting research, but I think we were a bit too early, and we didn't really have the hardware platforms that allowed us to scale. But several years later, about 2016, I said, okay, time for a fresh look. Now in the context of phones that are much more capable with cameras and other sensors, and also AI models, in particular vision models, deep learning models, that can do interesting things with the data that the sensors give you, right? And so that led to a project called HAMS, which I'm happy to talk about later in the conversation. And that's had actual tangible societal impact, right? So I've been really happy that an idea that started in 2007 with an urge, over time has led to something that is actually having a very positive impact on people.
That's a very important point you're making. I mean, one thought you're suggesting here is that you don't really differentiate between technology being used in a certain business context versus technology being used in a social context, right? In some indirect ways, they're all related to each other. But still, we have a topic like AI for social impact, right? Or social good. Somewhere we want to make this explicit, this idea that, technology has to be very explicitly be directed in a positive way, as opposed to it being accidentally directed or not being directed. Do you think there are some elements there at play?
Yeah, so actually, I would look at it as a problem defining things, right? So if you pick a problem that matters to lots of people, it can make a difference, and you go after it regardless of whether the business opportunity in terms of monetary returns is large or not. I think that it would, to me, define sort of societal good being front and center and the business aspects being perhaps secondary, right? So it's really a question of how you select the problem. The technology that goes into then sort of creating a solution to cater to the problem, I think that may or may not be any different from what you would do for a commercial customer, right? It is really the selection of the problem and identification of the problem that I would say matters here.
Fair enough. I think it's a very good point you're making. The point, I think, the way I understood it is that what is at the center? If the center is money, or is the center the larger impact of people?
The problem you're trying to solve, right?
The problem you're trying to solve.
If solved would make a big difference. That's correct.
Right. And you could make a lot of money from it at the same time, but that was never at the center, right? And that's just an accidental outcome or a side effect.
Yeah. And on the topic of business and so on, I think the thing that's important is that even if you're doing societal good work, it has to be self-sustaining, right? It has to be something that pays for itself, not necessarily make you a lot of money, but it has to sort of, let's say you work with partners, it has to make sense for that partner to then take your technology and actually roll it out to users, right? So I think that it's kind of important for that to be thought through, because otherwise these things will just die in many cases, right? They are not going to sustain themselves. So I think it's important, and again, I'm happy to talk about our experience in the context of this road safety work we did.
Yeah. Very good points. Wonderful. So let's go a little deeper into this idea of AI and technology. Now, before again we go into AI, especially because that's the topic of interest here, for at least for me. But let's just maybe take a step back and just address technology. We have some time, so we can talk a little about here. So technology also sometimes is, and I think you hinted at this a little, that it's not about technology, it's how you are framing the problem. The same technology could be relevant both ways. But sometimes people are afraid of technology. We are afraid, we sort of look at technology as a sort of in a dystopian context. It's sort of like almost by default saying, I've come across a lot of people who would, of course, a lot of people, and in the business we are at, technology is a pretty positive force, but a lot of people look at technology as also a negative force. What would you talk to them? How would you talk to them? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this has probably been true for millennia, right? Which is, every technology has good uses and, uses that are less desirable, right? So I think the important thing is to, focus on the positives that you can have with technology, while, of course, at the same time, doing what you can to make sure that it doesn't get misused. So, for example, maybe there's a good point for me to just get concrete with this project called HAMS that we did on road safety, right? So, essentially, the idea was to leverage a smartphone as a way to monitor a driver and their driving, right, to improve road safety. Right? So that was the goal. Now, this is exactly the flavor that you mentioned, which is, yes, you can improve safety by watching over the driver and making sure that they're doing the right thing. But the flip side is that this can become like the big brother that's watching over the driver, right, and intruding their privacy and this and that, right? So there are sort of those legitimate concerns as well. So we in this project we created the technology which is really using the sensors of the smartphone, the cameras, and the accelerometer, the gyro, and so on, along with machine learning algorithms and other techniques to infer various aspects. So, for example, whether the driver is distracted, whether they're scanning the mirrors. That's a very concrete example, right? So when you're driving, right, you should look straight ahead most of the time. I mean, that's a good practice. But a good thing. you should also scan your mirrors, because that's sort of what gives you situational awareness, right? And if there's a sudden event and you need to take an evasive maneuver, you need to be aware of what's around. Now, that's something that's sort of easy to say, but it's very hard to measure, right? So we use the camera of the phone along with some algorithms to sort of figure out where the user is scanning the mirrors appropriately. So anyway, so we did all these things. And then we said, hey, what's the use case for this? And then we ran through many use cases. One was a fleet owner might want to keep a check on their drivers, for example, but that's got this big brother kind of, it's got usefulness too, but, we are worried about that. Then there's insurance, would want this and so on. Right. Finally, just through chance, we settled on this problem of automating the driver license test, right? So it's a particular problem, I think, in India and maybe some other parts of the world where a lot of people get their driver's license without actually taking a test.
Right. Don't we know that in India?
The consequences of safety are not hard to imagine.
Right.
So what was nice about this is that it's a very confined thing. You go, you take your test, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then you're out, right? So concerns around privacy and being watched over by the system and so on were essentially non-existent. People didn't really worry about it. On the other hand, people liked the fact that it was a machine, a piece of technology that was administering the test. And even if they failed the test, they were actually happy because they thought the machine was objective. Whereas if an inspector had failed them, they would blame it on the bias of the inspector. Oh, the inspector didn't like me or was in a bad mood or whatever, right? So there were some positives. And the negatives were, in some sense, not that much because of the context, right? Because it's a very limited thing. And so for us, it was a perfect fit because, it's technology for good without having to worry. And the good here is, by the way, that the system becomes much cleaner, right? So you have technology doing this, so you don't have the human failings coming in the way of license testing, including simple things like making sure that the person taking the test is the same as the one that you're issuing the license to, right?
True.
Like that.
Right.
So anyway, so I think this is a long-winded answer to your question, but certainly it's important to think about the downsides as well as the upsides of technology. But if you stay at it and you think through this and you are persistent, I'm sure you'll be able to find a formulation that emphasizes the positives while limiting the downsides. Right? I think that's really the lesson from here.
Excellent points. I really like the idea around how technology clearly is better off when it comes to human failings, and that's like a positive side. Clearly, that one can very easily see. Of course, there is the bias can creep into the technology as well if you're not careful. But that's an excellent point you make, and that's just a very good segue into the next question. But before I do that, let me just once again welcome anybody or everybody who is joining late. We are talking here with Dr. Venkat Padmanabhan. He is Deputy Managing Director at Microsoft Research and very closely working with topics around social impact of technology and AI. And we are having a chat on, how can AI bring more societal good in the societies we live at. Great. So let's just, slide into the area of AI then. But before I do that, let me just quickly get the hype out of the AI, so to speak, right? ChatGPT has changed everything, it seems like, in the last few months, literally. I've just come back from US and I was in an Uber, and the guy started talking, and the first thing he talks to me about is like, do you know ChatGPT? And maybe because he thought that I would know something about it and so on for whatever reason. But I was just stunned by this very casual mention of ChatGPT by an Uber driver in US, right? But obviously each one of us here has been affected in some form through ChatGPT, right? But the larger question, Venkat, what do you think is the hype in AI, and what do you think is the reality in AI before we go into the impact of AI on social good?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not easy to answer, but I'll take a stab at it. By the way, I should mention, Anurag, I'm going to talk a lot about various projects at Microsoft and by my colleagues and so on. But the opinions I'm expressing are my own. We are not. I'm not speaking on behalf of Microsoft, right? Just to be clear, right?
Very important. These are your opinions, and I think it's really important to call that out, and not Microsoft Research. Yeah.
So AI. It is a field that's advancing at stunning speed. Let's be very blunt, right? So I think what was viewed as a distant dream just a few short years ago is now becoming reality, right? And ChatGPT is a great example of that. And there are other, DALL-E and all these new age tools. I think what's happening, and frankly, I don't think even the experts understand it. By the way, I'm not an AI researcher. I use AI in my projects where I can, but I'm not an AI researcher, but even if you talk to the AI researchers and AI experts, people don't quite understand how these large language models, for example, are working, right? So there's this notion of, as the model becomes large enough, 500 billion parameters or 1 trillion parameters or whatever the largest sizes are these days, there is all manner of sort of emergent behavior that arises, right? And things happen. But the way I see it, with a large enough model, you can perhaps, and that's what sort of things like ChatGPT are sort of approaching, right? You can perhaps get to the point where you have a predictive model, or a generative model that can predict the next word to utter in a indistinguishable from human, right? Because it's sort of learned all the relationships between past utterances based on tons of data. And so given all the previous context, it is able to pull out the next word,
right,
in a way that is not that different, not more different from what a human would do, right? If you're able to achieve that with a large enough model, I'm not claiming that ChatGPT has achieved that, but I think we're getting to the point where then in some sense, you could say that, hey, that thing is sort of equivalent to a human in terms of output, right? Now, whether it's human intelligence in the sense that we think of ourselves as intelligent, that frankly becomes beside the point, because if for the same input you're producing output that's equivalent to a human, and the machine is doing that,
right?
Sort of, it can play the role of a human, whether it's to take a medical test or a large exam or whatever, all these things that this machine is able to do, right? So I think the hype, in the past people would say, hey, if a cab driver is talking about some piece of technology, maybe there's a bubble there, right? But I think with this large language models and AI, I think there's a lot of substance here, right? People have tried chat. I mean, you have tried it, I have tried it. We are all able to try it, right? So this is not something that just been hyped up. Of course, it's got imperfections. I think the people who created it, OpenAI, will themselves admit that it hallucinates and it has issues. But it is something that will improve and is improving. And so I think it is something that people in every field should take seriously at this point.
Wonderful to hear that, and assuring to hear that. I'm also on the on the fence in some cases, right? I mean, very long time ago, I came across this little quote from Dr. von Neumann, who was a mathematician and was part of the quantum phenomena, right? The whole theory building of quantum mechanics, and he said something like, "Oh, give me 4 variables and I'll make an elephant go through the eye of the needle." Like the kind of non-linearity that is possible. And the flexibility that there is in an equation, if you have 4 variables, is sufficient for him to make an elephant go through the eye of the needle. And today these, I don't know, 200 billion, half a trillion parameters models, right? I mean, God only knows what that really means, right? In terms of what kind of modeling is getting captured. So I'm also at some level completely disoriented and not sure of how to really interpret it. But of course, the outcomes that we are seeing, right, with these kinds of models is also pretty remarkable. I mean, on the one hand, you don't have so much accuracy, but you have the kind of breadth and general not understanding, but at least the ability to answer or discover answers to questions with such remarkable precision. That's also pretty amazing. But yeah, absolutely, we can't dismiss it straight off. Great. So with language models and maybe we'll circle back to language models, but let's just maybe again go back to the whole question around social good. I mean, what would be wonderful, Venkat, is if you could maybe walk us through a few examples of how and what kinds of projects have been a part of when it has come to social good. You already talk about road safety, maybe that, or maybe a few other ones. And what would be even better is if you could take one and dive deeper into it as much as possible, so that we can have some insight into what does a typical application which has a strong social impact typically look like, and what are the challenges, concerns, and other contexts that we should be thinking about.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So the way I see it, where AI and technology in general can help in societal impact context is where you can either lower the cost of something, increase access to something, make up for human failings, as I mentioned the earlier example of road safety and so on, right? So I think the starting point for a lot of these things is really sort of understanding what is it that is holding back a particular application, right? And then trying to see how technology and AI can help with the cost and the access and so on and so forth, right? So so let me, I'll come back to the road safety thing because I think there are some interesting lessons to be learned there as well. But let me talk about something that's sort of much more recent. It's not my work; it's a work of a colleague of mine, Pratyush Kumar, on leveraging these GPT, 3 and 3.5 kind of large language models for something that's very interesting. It really sort of speaks to this access problem, right? Mm-hmm. So you have these large models that do very interesting things. The question was, how do you leverage that to help someone in some remote corner of the world access information in a natural, sort of human-like way without requiring any additional effort, right? So the simple insight in this work, it's something called Bhashini bot, right? They created a WhatsApp bot that allows someone to speak, Hindi or any Indian language, I think, and have a natural conversation with the system about some government programs, right? And the simple observation here is that there is the interface between the user and the machine. So things like language translation and so on happen at that level. And then there is a reasoning part, which is in the backend, which then takes what the user spoke and figures out what is the most relevant piece of text to generate in response to the user's prompt, right? And so they decouple the two. So essentially, they have language translation and text to speech and speech to text happening at the front end, right, using sort of models. And they just leveraged the existing GPT 3.5 model with the right kind of prompting. Not really any modification, right? So this is a model that was generated. It was not really trained on the government data, or it was not certainly set in the Indian context, but it had this sort of quote unquote reasoning ability, right? Sort of given a certain prompt, it can generate a response that made logical sense. And so they went from so essentially speech to text translation, feed that along with sort of other carefully crafted information as a prompt to the backend, get a response, and then do the reverse and produce speech again. In I think Hindi was the demo that was done, and it was really stunning, right? Because essentially this is something where you are able to leverage technology that was created without really having this user context in mind,
right?
With the sort of the right decoupling of or the decomposition of the problem into the user interface and the reasoning engine, you had magic happen, right? So that is an example of that. With regard to the road safety, the HAMS project I talked about, there are a couple of points I want to make, right? So, AI is obviously huge, and I already mentioned, right? This is reality, and I think all of us need to wake up to it. But in making any of these things work, it's an engineering problem. You can't say, hey, I'm going to just focus on just AI and then forget the rest, right? So I'll give you a very concrete example, right? So our idea was to use the smartphone in a vehicle, right? To do monitoring of the driver and so on. But we were deploying it in North India, where in the summer temperatures go to 45, and with this thing running all your AI models, the temperature of the phone could be 50 degrees, right? It would just melt down, right? It would just we had the phone just shut down because of the compute that was happening on top of the environment being really hot. And so you have to be really careful about how you leverage different paradigms of computation. So, for example, the best AI model is not something you might want to run all the time. You may want to be selective in using that because it's computationally very expensive. And in this case, the computational cost really manifests also as heat, and the phone can, right? And then you sort of use much simpler traditional vision-based techniques than those. So you have to sort of made these together in a careful way. So that requires sort of understanding the constraints of the engineering problem, and then sort of working out a solution, right? So the other point I would make about this project is that when we did this work, we were thinking about automation, and we'll sort of reduce cost and deal with human failing and so on. And then the pandemic happened, and there was a very unexpected benefit, right? So as you imagine, during the pandemic, no driver and no inspector wanted to be in the car together.
Right.
So the idea that we had a phone administering the test was a bonus that everyone was very happy with, right? Because they didn't want to be the person. So the point is that unexpected benefits happen. But anyway, so I think I made a few different points here. But my main point here is that think of these as engineering problems. AI is a big part of your toolkit, but there are other things to think about as well. And the same thing with Bhashini bot, what my colleagues did was really, you can't just throw GPT 3.5 at the problem directly. You have to think about how to pose it and do the right thing. Right? So that's what I would say.
Wonderful answers, and thank you so much. There's so much So much knowledge hidden in all those things that you said. Let me bring them out a little bit for the benefit of some of our listeners. One thing that you talked about was how AI can improve social outcomes, and you give two indicators to it. One is that it decreases the cost for something, or it increases the access to something, right? These are the two important dimensions you brought out, and those are very good mental model things to keep in mind as you're thinking. There are some things that have been said around AI generally, that it brings down the cost of prediction on an average. And so because it reduces the cost of prediction, and prediction is a very important input to decision making, it's a really amazing thing what AI can do. But that what you're referring to is really important. And the second thing is improving the access to something. And the example you gave to that, right, which was that how Bhashini bot, is that Bhashini you said?
Yes, Bhashini right? is a government program in India.
Okay.
The bot was what my colleagues created as a way of,
Right. So if I think about that bot, what it's doing is it's allowing two people with understanding of completely two different languages. First of all, by just using speech to text and text to speech in a sort of a translation paradigm. First of all, it allows that interaction to happen. But not only that, but it's also allowing a person to interact with a knowledge base somewhere and retrieve knowledge and get information in an automated way using language as a modality, a communication or speech as a modality of retrieval, right? And so suddenly the access to both knowledge and communication is so much more increased because of the fact that two people with two different language paradigms can talk to each other, which is, I think, is a great interaction. I mean, the amount of interaction possible now between, the 8 billion people is suddenly gone, I don't know, to a completely different level. And then the second is, people being able to access information or knowledge, which was probably not easy to access because they maybe did not know how to write or type or something, or they did not know English enough and they could not have written in English. And in this case, they could come in a language like Tamil or some native language of some local region. And if people have created enough of an AI model, that could be facilitated, right? So that's like improving the access to both knowledge and communication, which is dramatic.
Absolutely, yeah.
The third thing you pointed out, which I think is again a fascinating topic in itself and something that we should dive into, is that it's not only about AI models, it's about engineering that whole thing. And that's super important because now, because of our attention being taken over so much by AI models, we should not just devalue the engineering that is necessary to build such solutions. And that's only going to get more complex and more challenging in the days to come, because we are going to try and instrument this to our reality more and more, like this weather condition in India and so on, right? So excellent points, Venkat, there. But any other examples you would like to bring around social impact that we could explore in these areas, or maybe related?
Maybe mention a couple of. I think I mentioned one other project, and then maybe throw out an idea for something that people could work on as an interesting social impact thing. So the project I want to talk about is a project that was called Dependable IoT. So there's nothing to do with AI per se. It started off with nothing to do with AI. It is really the simple idea that in the Internet of Things and sensors everywhere and that whole vision, the whole foundation here is on the sensor and the data that it's collecting, right? And if that foundation is shaky, then everything else you build on it is on a shaky foundation, right? And so the idea there was, can we learn signatures, sometimes even physics-based signatures of sensor behavior that will tell us whether a sensor is working correctly or not, right? And so sort of understanding the physics of sensors and sort of understanding, RC curves. Maybe Anurag, you remember, like from our IIT days, we had all these sort of courses on electrical engineering, and so we talked about the RC curve, how things decay. There are all these sort of really fundamental phenomena that are happening, and understanding those was really the foundation. Now, where the ML and the AI came in was then sort of in being able to create signatures that could easily be checked and so on, right? So certainly it was, and then And it's important that we're talking about IoT devices, very little memory footprint and so on. So the ML model had to be really compact and to be able to run on a really low cost sensing device. So it is clearly important. But again, going back to my point about understanding the engineering problem, you have to understand sensors and how they work and what fundamental characteristics are there and so on. Now, the societal impact that so this work was done sort of really as technology-driven research, but the very interesting societal application was in the context of air pollution monitoring, right? So there is a company called Respirer, and Respirer, builds these boxes, and I think they have a large number of them across India and perhaps even beyond. Looking at air pollution monitoring and looking at air quality, one of the issues here is that there are these really large, I forget exactly what they're called, I think BAM or some such thing. They're really high-end air quality sensing, outposts that are there, but they are very expensive. So they are like, maybe you might have two in a city, right? We wanted to have, or rather, Aspire wanted to have a much higher density of, sensing nodes. But then that meant going with low-cost hardware, and then you have to worry about all these other sensor issues and so on. And so when they found out about dependable IoT, the work that done by some colleagues of mine, they were very interested in integrating that into their sensing box. So today, some of the dependable IoT techniques and the sensor signatures use this sort of compact machine learning to figure out whether the sensor is working well or not, are part of these boxes that are deployed, nationwide, right, to do air quality monitoring. So anyway, I guess the point I want to make here is that, again, AI is the flavor of the day, and it's huge. But really, don't lose sight of the problem you're trying to solve. Don't lose sight of all the tools available in your technology repertoire, including AI, right? So sort of really keep that in mind. The potential application that, actually my colleague Pratyush, who did the Bashani bot, he was talking about creating an intelligent tutor. So let's say you're a student trying to sort of master, some subject. Maybe you are in the 7th grade or something, and you're trying to learn something. Can you leverage these generative AI models to create, like, for example, you can tell ChatGPT, hey, explain something as you would to a 6-year-old.
6-year-old, right? Or to your grandmother or something like that, right? Yeah,
exactly. Right. So can you leverage those capabilities to create an intelligent tutor for a student, so that the student is conversing with AI at their level, right, and sort of getting response that makes sense to them. And this goes back to access, right? Not everyone has the money or the resource to engage a private tutor. So now technology and AI is playing that role, but sort of in a way that is appropriate to the context and the level of the student and so on and so forth, right? So I think this is a potentially very interesting application that I don't know if such things exist, but I have no doubt that things like this will get created, right? And I think people are interested should look into opportunities like this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing around IoT is so critical. I mean, while we are perfecting the brain, which is the AI model, getting all these signals from all these places with high fidelity, I mean, that's like an engineering challenge. Scaling these AI models is a challenge because these are extremely computationally expensive and not easy to build, and then maintaining them and maintaining their corpus and building all. I mean, so there are the challenges are just becoming a thing on themselves, and your point's well taken. At the same time, you're also talking about, like, while these models are becoming available, they're also decreasing the complexity of some other tasks. Like now, the whole question around intelligent tutoring, which I don't know how would we have solved the problem if ChatGPT was not around. I mean, if I have to frame my right, I don't know. I can't think of like, okay, how would I solve that problem?
I mean, think of these things like ChatGPT and the large language models as building blocks that are available, right? And sort of just use them as you would use other technologies, right? So you don't have to create everything from scratch.
Absolutely. I mean, they've suddenly changed the, on the one hand, it's really complex to make ChatGPT itself, but once ChatGPT is built, it just makes so many things so easy to build, right? Which you would not know how to build otherwise in this.
And there's plenty of problem to be solved, right? It's not like ChatGPT or whatever will magically solve everything, right? So you have to prompt it appropriately, right? So you may have to fine tune it. I mean, there are all these sort of context-specific things that work that is required, and there's plenty of creativity that you can bring to bear on that without having to reinvent the wheel, so to say, right?
Makes perfect sense. No, absolutely. I was hoping that we'd talk, maybe do one more round of questions to Dr. Venkat before maybe coming to a small to a close, and maybe then taking a few of the audience questions, which I think I have some here. Although Venkat, I mean, there are a lot of them around AI, so be ready to answer a few AI questions. Maybe you can just ask ChatGPT to answer them. but no, we have the benefit of having you. Now, one question I worry about, like, and let me circle back to the problem of meaning. I think I've gone through a crisis in life where I was like, okay, I'm doing all these cool technology things, but is it creating value? Before I came to Nagarro, I was part of one startup where we were trying to solve the diabetic retinopathy problem, where we were looking at fundus images. Fundus is a type of a camera which captures the image of a retina back wall, and then we're trying to do deep learning with it and trying to see if we can see early signatures of diseases, right? And eye is a very great place to look at, because pretty much all diseases manifest early on and give symptoms in the eye. And then I found that project. I was just really relieved and very happy to have had a chance to work on it for some reason. Now I wanted to ask you, if you meet a young person and you've had so much experience in this technology industry, and you meet a young person and you want to give him some pointers or her some pointers around social good, what would your message be? I mean, how would you frame this to a young person in today's environment who's looking at all this technology, is looking at all these capabilities, and how would you direct them in what direction, and what would you say to them? So your message to a young person today.
Right. Yeah. What I would say is, just look around you and you'll find plenty of really important and interesting problems to go and tackle. Now, obviously, you can't go and tackle all of them. So you will have to then go through a process of sort of figuring out where you want to focus your energies. But, you mentioned this eye diabetic retinopathy. I mean, I think that's a great example. I mean, these are things that are around us, right? We know people who have suffered these. We know sort of that, we go to hospital, you see, a bunch of people with such and other conditions. So what I would say is, look around you to find inspiration for problems. And I think once you've identified, in fact, in research, people say often the hardest thing is to define the problem, identify the problem. And then actually solving it is important, but it is the easier part, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So I think what I will tell anyone, young or old, is that if you're interested in having impact, especially on society, just look around, and then you will see what is suboptimal, what is not ideal, and then that will give you an idea of sort of what you can do. And then, of course, then you have to sort of marry that with what technology can do, right? Now with ChatGPT, maybe you can do things that you thought were not possible a few months ago, right? So the point is that you have to keep up with what technology can do, and then sort of figure out, okay, maybe that's an interesting problem where I can bring my skills to bear and leverage technology, and then we'll go after it. Right? And then the other thing I would say is be persistent, right? I gave you an example from my own personal experience of the road safety thing. When we started in 2007, the smartphones were not very smart, no sensors. We couldn't really go very far. And then I revived this project in 2016 with a different name, and then we could go much further. So I think if a problem, if it's a problem that you believe in, stay persistent. It doesn't mean that you have to do this every day. You can take a break and do something else and then come back. But
like a side project, you could do it like a side project over multiple years, over a period of
also
time.
sort of sometimes timing is everything, right? So maybe if you were too early the first time around, maybe look for the right opportunity and then come back, right? So
really good points, Venkat. I mean, obviously, healthcare, education are burning topics in today's world. Poverty is an important topic in today's world. Knowledge access are important. They all exist around us. I mean, what you're saying is look around you. You are bound to see these problems at some level. Take inspiration from that. The second thing is, keep working on it on a long-term basis. Frame your problem, build your knowledge base, your understanding around that problem. See now that there are multiple tools one could use to try and solve them, and so forth, right? But in general, you think that that there is plenty of problems and context that is available to a youngster today, and all they need to do is really have the desire within to really try and bring out some of these problems as challenges for themselves, right?
Right. And also the other thing I would say is that there is no one right problem, right? You have to really go with what interests you and what, right? You can't say, oh, road safety is more or less important than health, or health is more important than education. All of them are very important. All of them are super important. If you can make a difference in any one of them, you've done good, right? So there's no right problem, right? Because sometimes people are sort of looking to optimize that, right? So I think you should really go with what really what is something that you're able to connect with, right? And that really depends on where you are, which part of the world you're in, and what problems you see around you.
Very important point. I mean, we should look at it from our reference frame, look at who we are as people ourselves, and what motivates us, what inspires us, and that should be our driving force towards this. Wonderful. I mean, it's been great, Venkat. I mean, really wonderful talking to you on a topic on social good, a topic close to my heart, and I know a topic close to several people I know in our friend circle and in our community, in our workplaces. So nice you could, make yourself available and give us some thoughts, inspiration on what you have done personally on these topics. It would be great to maybe have a follow-up conversation at some point on the same topic, maybe with more examples and more inspirations that we could bring. And thank you all for listening. I mean, let me formally, at least, I would not, I would close the topic here, but maybe address or try and bring up some of the questions that our audience has been wanting to ask you, Venkat. I see a lot of AI questions, but let me bring that out anyways, and you feel free if you want to answer that, because you've mentioned that you are generally a technologist and AI is not your specialty, but we think it's you know more about it than a lot of us, so it'll be great. So one of the questions is, do we think, Venkat, that ethics around AI ML is a lagging topic? I mean, ethics that the knowledge of or the ethical structure or framework we need to develop around AI ML is not keeping up with the speed of technology of AI ML itself.
Again, as a non-expert, I mean, I wouldn't really say so, right? I mean, I think there are plenty of people paying a lot of attention to things like ethics, and in fact, even the latest and greatest technologies do have, for example, one of the things that underlies things like ChatGPT is this notion of reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? So right. There is this notion of leveraging human feedback to align the AI to human values, right? Now, that's not to say that they've solved the problem or it's perfect and so on. No one is claiming that, but there is enough attention that's been, or not, I should not say enough. There's been plenty of attention paid to this topic, even by people creating the latest and greatest AI models, right? So, could we do more? Absolutely. I think we could do more. But I think if someone is interested in that topic of, I think generally it goes under the name of responsible AI. I think that's sort of one of the names. There is plenty of work out there, and you should connect with communities that are focusing on that. So I think my answer is, it's not like it is being ignored. It is just that that is one thread of activity, and there is sort of other people making progress on other dimensions, and I think both are making progress.
I would completely agree. I mean, somewhere I'd come across a stat which I don't remember, and I don't want to just talk about it, but the number of papers that are being written on these topics is a lot, and you can see the amount of attention this topic is taking generally in the academic community. So no, great, wonderful. Let me sort of take a dark question. This is an interesting question by one of our business analysts at Capgem, and I kind of like it because it sort of brings to surface one of the fears that at some level is lurking in pretty much everybody's mind. And let me just phrase the question because I think it's phrased quite nicely. And the person says, I always wonder if AI replaces people on all fronts, wouldn't that have a domino effect on the economy? People will be jobless, in turn won't have money to consume AI-built technologies. this might be a dark side of AI social impact. Can you please deep dive? What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, it's sort of a hard question to answer. Maybe we should ask the AI model to predict what could happen in the future. Ask ChatGPT that. I think I mean, we've all seen this over the years, right? Like over the decades, new technology comes. There is fear of jobs disappearing, but then people find other things to do. So I think AI is bigger. I mean, it's probably bigger than perhaps some of the previous technology revolutions, but it is still the case that it is not on autopilot, right? The point is that humans are required. I'd give you very concrete examples of prompting it, sort of coming up with the right kind of prompts to actually elicit the right responses. So you need human expertise even to leverage this AI. I think the right way to think about this is that the AI can just give a significant boost to human productivity, right? So what you and I might have done in 8 hours, now we can do in 4 hours, and then kick back and relax the remaining 4 hours, right? And that's not such a bad thing, right? In some sense, I mean, the work week has been shrinking over the decades and even over the past 100 years, and so that trend might continue. But like if you think about these medical applications, diagnosis and so on, someone who had gone untreated in the past now will actually get AI to at least sort of give them something that's very good or close to being as good as a doctor, and I mean that's a positive outcome. So I think of course as society we'll have to sort of figure out the right balance, and I think those things will get figured out in the coming years. But I think although it does seem a bit scary at first blush, I think the way to think about it is that it's a positive force that can be leveraged to amplify human productivity and human ability, but not really replace humans and sort of make them sort of redundant. I don't think that's going to happen.
I think so too, and but you're absolutely right. I mean, I feel that extreme conditions extreme situations come to our mind both optimistic and pessimistic side much more quickly. Nature and the way situations do evolve, that they sort of you take one step forward and then the next step will try and correct whatever happened. And like ethics and many other things that are being worked on, people are also trying to regulate AI. I've seen we've seen that in our industry. There's a lot of regulation that is being built around AI in many, many different ways. People are being sensitized to what can potentially happen. All of this is, so there's active feedback on all fronts. And then this feedback is sort of the regulation of, in my mind, of what would happen. So I tend to see it like that. One more question, Venkat, since we have a few more minutes, maybe the last one. This is around social bias. And the question is, that what would you suggest that we could do to decrease or reduce social bias from AI models?
Right. Yeah. I think that's a good question. Also, I mean, AI sort of learns from existing data, and so it does tend to learn the biases that are in the data as well. So that's sort of a consequence of that. I mentioned the example of ChatGPT and how it uses human feedback. So this reinforcement learning with human feedback. That's a way in which sort of you can, have a check on this, right? So yes, it may have learned certain biased things, and but when you give it feedback saying, hey, this answer is better than that one, and sort of give it feedback of that kind, it can then adapt and sort of learn to spit out better answers, right? So I think there are mitigations available. Of course, none of this is perfect, right? So no one claims that these models are perfect, but no human is perfect either. So I think that is the reality we're dealing with. But I think perhaps what is important is, and I don't have an answer to this, I can just sort of throw this out there, with a human, right? I mean, let me give an example of, you call customer service on the phone, you're talking to a human. They are a human, you can talk to them, you can explain your special circumstances, and, you can sort of hope for a resolution. Whereas if you're dealing with a machine and it has certain biases and it does something, the question is whether you're going to have that ability to have a recourse, right? Can you go back and tell it something? And I think those are the things that we would have to figure out, right, as society. Right? So if AI takes over, will it have the sensitivity and the sort of the emotional quotient of a human to be able to, okay, this is what the rules say, but this person seems to have special circumstances, so let me cut him or her some slack and do something. I mean, these are things that humans can do that machines are not good at. I think we'll have to sort of figure those out. I think it's still early days, right? So things like large language models haven't really been adopted in a big scale. I mean, I think every day we see announcements of applications of these, but in the coming months and years, we will see real applications. And then we'll have to actually then figure out, okay, how do we bring in some of the human qualities that are perhaps missing in the machine or in the AI, and that might open up a lot of interesting new work and new research as well.
Wonderful talking to you, Venkat. The last point I think is a great place to maybe stop. I mean, while these are early days, really early days, we have seen the first large language model, but at the same time, let's keep believing in ourselves and our desire to do good for our world that we're living in, which is the whole topic around social good. I mean, if we have our intentions in the right place, hopefully all the right steps will happen even in the future, and perhaps the world would be a better place from all of this. Thank you so much for talking with us today, Venkat. It really was a pleasure. I learned a lot. I enjoyed this interaction so much with you, and thank you for taking time and talking to us on such an important.
Thank you, Anurag. Really wonderful. And actually, I guess Nagarro is special because you and a lot of our batchmate Manas and others are some of the leaders of that company. And it's really good to see this initiative by Nagarro. And it's really been an honor for me to be part of this program. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching this lovely episode on AI for social good. Hopefully, you all enjoyed it. See you again in the next episode that'll get aired hopefully soon in the future. Thank you and bye.